We're going to have a quiz on the third section tomorrow, whether we finish it today or not, because y'all should be able to read this. But I'm going to go rather quickly, okay? So Darrell, in this particular section, he is relaying to us that Dewey Dell is demonstrating some unusual behavior. She keeps telling them that she needs to stop, she needs to go to use the bushes. So they kind of are in an understanding that she is saying that she needs to go to the restroom. But when they stop and she goes to the bushes, she goes out, she changes into her Sunday clothes, and then she gets back on the wagon. You know, we don't really have a full comprehension of why she feels like she needs to dress up to go to town, but, you know, it could be because, you know, she's going to try to meet with a doctor or somebody to help her. It could be just because, you know, she does not want to look as out of place being a country girl or a farm girl, and she wants to try to fit in better. You know, it could be, you know, because she wants to look nice for the actual burial of her mother, but we don't really know. There's, you know, a variety of different possibilities there. All right, while she is changing, some men are walking by, and they make some comments about the smell of Addie, because, I mean, it's been 8 or 9 days at this point. And so Jewel kind of bucks up on them because that's what Jewel does, and then one of the men pulls a knife. Well, Cash can't do anything to help because, you know, he's immobilized from his broken leg in the cement incident. So he calls on Darrell to defuse the situation, and Darrell does. He diffuses the situation, and, you know, they put up the knife, and they kind of continue on, and, you know, apologies are passed back and forth. So for our questions, the unusual behavior that she exhibits is changing into her Sunday clothes. What starts the fight between Jewel and the man on the road? The man says something about the smell, a misunderstanding ensues, and he pulls a knife, and they almost get a fight. And then who ends the fight is Jewel and Darrell. Is Darrell. Okay, so chapter 53 is a Cash chapter, and there's several things that I want to point out here, and I want you to mark. The first is this first two sentences here. It was nothing else to do. It was either send him to Jackson or have Gillespie sue us because he knowed some way that Darrell set fire to it. So what is Cash lamenting in this chapter? Like, what is he thinking about? What is Cash thinking about right here? He tells us it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, they're sending Darrell to the state mental hospital. You know, and he was like trying to rationalize it. He was like, well, I guess they don't really have any other option. You know, he did set fire to the barn. Gillespie obviously knew that Darrell set fire to his barn. You know, we don't have the money to pay that. You know, he would potentially face some jail time. So, you know, he does act kind of crazy. People talk about him. So I guess, you know, sending him is kind of really our best, you know, choice here. Just something I want to point out up here, this bad word that Jewel says repeatedly, you know, that's it's in very sharp contrast to the fact that his biological father is the minister. So we see some irony there. All right, but then a little bit further down, we see Cash kind of thinking through the situation that's going on with Darrell again. And he says, sometimes I ain't so sure whose air got a right to say when a man is crazy and when he ain't. Sometimes I think it ain't none of us pure crazy and ain't none of us pure sane until the balance of us talks him that away. It's like it ain't so much what a fellow does, but it's the way the majority of folks is looking at him when he does it. So, you know, he's saying, you know, what really gives people the right to make these choices, to make these justifications about who is crazy and who is not? You know, it almost seems like it depends on what, you know, the majority thinks about someone at a particular time. All right, so he talks a little bit about Jewel, and, you know, he talks about Jewel going to get her out of the river because Jewel is too hard on him. Of course, it was Jewel's horse was traded to get her that night of town, and in a sense, it was the value of the horse Darrell tried to burn up. But I thought more than once before we crossed the river and after how it would be God's blessing if he did take her out in our hands and get her shut of her in some clean way. And it seemed to me that when Jewel worked so to get her out into the river, he was going against God in a way. And then when Darrell seen that it looked like one of us would have to do something, I could almost believe he done right in a way. But I don't reckon nothing excuses setting fire to a man's barn and endangering his stock and destroying his property. So he says, you know, he almost feels like he understands exactly what Darrell was saying and where he was coming from, because he recognizes that, you know, Darrell was trying to, you know, end this farce whereas Jewel continued to save her. And he's wondering, if God really meant for her to float on down the river or to be gone in the fire. All right, so they continue. They go up the street, and we find out about a little bit of the age information. This has been very confusing. We better take Cash to the doctor first. We can leave him there and come back for him. That's it. It's because me and him was born close together, and it's nigh 10 years before Jewel and Dewey Dale and Vardaman begun to come along. So Darl is looking out for Cash, and he's like, we might should take him to the doctor before we bury her because this situation is really bad. And so Cash says, well, he looks out for me because we were very close, because it was just two of us for 10 years. And we know Dewey Dale's 17, so that puts Darl and Cash at least 27. All right. We find out she's already waited 9 days. All right, so Ann's is pushing for them to go ahead and bury her and wait to take Cash to the doctor. So he says, I reckon we got to get a spade, he said. I reckon there are Christians here. So Darl sat still, and we went on with Jewel squatting on the tailgate, watching the back of Darl's head. He looked like one of those bulldogs, one of these dogs that don't bark none, squatting against the rope, watching the thing he was waiting to jump at. He sat that way all the time we was in front of Mrs. Bundren's house, hearing the music, watching the back of Darl's head with them hard white eyes of his'n. The music was playing in the house. It was one of them graphophones. It was natural as a music band. Do you want to go to Peabody's? Darl said. They can wait here until Pa, and I'll drive you to Peabody's and come back for them. Okay, so Cash is telling us about the situation when Ann goes to borrow a spade. All right, and he goes to Mrs. Bundren's house, and she's playing music on this graphophone, this instrument. All right, so we have some kind of interesting clues about what's to come. Now, remember, Faulkner uses this nonlinear narrative, so Cash could be going back. This could be in the future, and he could be reflecting on something that happened previously here. All right, but the idea that he stopped at Mrs. Bundren's house tells us what? Who is Mrs. Bundren? It's not Addie. Huh?
Was that
All right, we'll come back to this. But they have a graphophone, and this plays music, and this was something that Darl was interested in. All right? So again, he pulled up at Mrs. Bundren's. It was like he knowed, and he talks about that for a little bit. He talks about how Ann's was inside for over more than 10 minutes, and the music stopped and never came back again. All right, and then they saw the woman looking out the window. All right, and then he talks again about how Darl and Dewey Dale are able to communicate without words, and he figures that somehow that has some sort of a relationship to Gillespie knowing that Darl has burned his barn. And again, he's still trying to rationalize what's going on. All right, so Jewel says he'd kill him, he can tie him up, things like that, but he's still trying to rationalize his decision about having Darl, or the family's decision about having Darl sent off to the mental hospital. So on chapter 53, what action that the family takes is Cash trying to justify sending Darl to the hospital. And what is Darl's reaction? And he's started doing this now a lot. He's just laughing. And so Jewel says, we'll kill him, we'll tie him up. And so what are two details that we notice about the place where Ann's goes to borrow spades? Huh? There's music, and how is she referred? They call her Mrs. Bundren, and there's music. Okay, so Peabody is chapter 54, and he is the doctor. We know that. And he says, I reckon a man in a tight might let Bill Varner patch him up like a blank mule, but I'll be blank if the man that let Ann's Bundren treat him with raw cement ain't got more spare legs than I have. All right, using context clues, tell me, who is Bill Varner? Using the information in this passage, who is Bill Varner? What kind? What kind of doctor?
What is it called?
Huh? He's a vet. All right. So he says, I reckon if you're in a tight, you might go to the vet instead of the real doctor. But, you know, no matter what, I'm not going to let Ann's put cement on my leg. Like, Peabody, he's just letting it out. He can't stand Ann's. All right? And so he asked Cash, he was like, how are you? And Cash is like, it never bothered me much, he said, because remember, Cash suffers in silence. He's quiet, he's stoic. You mean it never bothered Ann's much, I said. No more than it bothered him to throw that poor devil down in the public street and handcuff him like a blank murderer. Talking about Darrell when they had him shipped off. Don't tell me it ain't going to bother you to lose 60-odd square inches of skin to get that concrete off. And don't tell me it ain't going to bother you to have to limp around on one short leg for the balance of your life. Why is that ironic?
Because he can.
And? What about this word? Yeah, because he was so worried about the balance of the casket, and now the irony is he will be off balance. If you walk at all. Again, concrete, I said. God almighty. Why didn't Ann's carry you to the nearest sawmill and stick your leg in the saw? That would have cured it. Then you all could have stuck his head into the saw and cured a whole family. Where is Ann's anywhere? What's he up to now? So what does Peabody say they should have done? Taken Ann's out, and then that would have helped them all. All right? So in the Peabody section, Peabody is angry about what? Yeah, the cement. And what is the outlook for Cash and his leg? If he can walk again, he's going to not be on balance. And he's going to lose a lot of skin. All right, 55. Who is McGowan? The clerk at the drugstore. So Dewey Dale goes to the drugstore because she's hoping to get medicine to end her pregnancy. All right, the pharmacist is not there, but the clerks are. They look at her and they're like, you know, she looks pretty good for a country girl. So they talk back and forth, and one of them kind of presents himself under false pretenses as the doctor or as the pharmacist. And he asks, you know, what's going on? And he basically surmises that she has something in her belly that she does not want there. And so he tells her he's going to give her some medicine. And he gives her some medicine, but then he also tells her that she will have to come back after 10 o'clock when everybody is gone so he can finish the treatment because it's illegal. And so she falls for it, and she goes back. And he says, well, where do I take the treatment? He's like, down in the cellar. And it's just kind of left hanging. It's implied that he rapes her or takes advantage of her sexually down there. All right? And that's the McGowan section. So who is McGowan? He's the drugstore clerk. And what terrible trick does he put over on Dewey Dale? He takes sexual advantage of her of some sort. Okay, so Vardaman is having some trouble understanding Darrell and Darrell going to Jackson. And you see this repeatedly in several lines that are italicized. Darrell, he went to Jackson, is my brother. Darrell is my brother. All right, and then he talks about the train again. And then Darrell went to Jackson. Lots of people didn't go to Jackson. Darrell is my brother's going to Jackson. He has a moment, he talks about the buzzards roosting in the trees. Darrell got on the train to Jackson. All right, so he's wanted to see this shiny, like, train, toy train, but now his brother's on the real train, headed to Jackson. All right, Darrell is my brother. Darrell went crazy. Darrell, he went to Jackson. My brother Darrell, he had a banana. Would you rather have bananas? Dewey Dale says. You wait till Christmas. The train will be there then. All right, then we have a cow coming on, and he continues talking about Darrell. All right, so Dewey Dale comes out and picks up Vardaman on the street after she's seen McGowan, and she's kind of talking to herself about how she knows that this treatment is not going to work. All right, so in chapter 56, what is Vardaman having trouble understanding? Yeah, where his brother's going and why. Chapter 57 is a Darrell chapter, and he is speaking in third person. And he is talking about going to Jackson, how they put him on the train. He was laughing. They were like, what are you laughing at? The men wore mismatched coats that were budging over their right hip, probably because they had a gun in their pocket. Their necks shaved. All right, and then he has this kind of confusing section that does finally confirm to us that, yes, he has been in the war. They pulled two seats together so Darrell could sit by the window to laugh. One of them sat beside him. The other sat on the seat facing him, riding backward. One of them had to ride backward because the state's money has to face each backside and a backside to each face. And they are riding on the state's money, which is incest. A nickel has a woman on one side and a buffalo on the other. Two faces and no back. I don't know what that is. Darrell had a little spy glass he got in France at the war. In it had a woman and a pig with 2 backs and no face. I know what that is. Is that why you were laughing, Darl? Yes, 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 yes. So he's not really making a lot of sense now, all right? But he does describe that, basically, if they're sitting on the train, these are seats facing each other, all right? And they are sitting here facing like this, okay? So they're facing each other instead of like sitting behind them like you would normally think about sitting on a train, okay? So where is Darl? On the train. And what is different?
He's in third person.
He's in third person. And what does that tell us about?
I don't know. He's just kind of disassociated.
Yeah, he's disassociated. He's lost touch with reality. Okay? In chapter 58, what does Anne's take from Dewey Dill? Huh? Her money. When he saw the money, I said, "It's not my money. It doesn't belong to me." So she tells him it's Cora Toll's money, that she sold the cakes for it. And then Anne's, he's like, "How could you, not give your father this money? Who gave it to you?" And she's like, "It's not mine. I can't give it to you. It's not mine." But he ends up taking it anyway. So he takes the money that Laugh has given her for the abortion. So in chapter 58, what happens in the confrontation?
He took
He-
money away from her.
Yeah, he takes her money. All right, so then we have Cash, and he tells us we stopped to borrow the shovels, and we heard the graphophone playing. And so when we got done with the shovels, Paul says he better take them back. And so they offered to let Vardaman because he'd be faster. And Anne's was like, no, I will do it myself. I reckon I better because I borrowed them. All right, then he continues talking, and they take Cash to Peabody's. And while they're there, Paul went to the barber shop and he got a shave. And so that night, he said he had some business to tend to, kind of looking away from us when he said it, kind of like he was ashamed of it, with his hair combed wet and slick and smelling sweet with perfume. But I said, leave him be. I wouldn't mind hearing a little more of that music myself. So he's already going where? He's going somewhere. All right. So Jewel got the team and come for me, and they fixed me a pallet in the wagon, and we drove across the square to the corner where Pa said, and we was waiting there in the wagon with Vardaman and Dewey Dill eating bananas, and we see them coming up the street. Pa was coming along with that kind of daresome and hangdog look all at once, like he has been up to something he knows Ma ain't going to like, carrying a grip in his hand, and Jewel says, "Who's that?" Then we see it wasn't the grip that made him look different, it was his face. And Jewel says, "He got them teeth," because that's what he used Dewey Dill's money for. It was a fact. It made him look a foot taller, kind of holding his head up, hangdog and proud too. And then we see her behind him, carrying the other grip, a kind of duck-shaped woman all dressed up, and them kind of hard-looking pop eyes like she was daring Araman to say something. All right? And we will discuss this last little section tomorrow, but we are going to have a test on the whole third question set tomorrow.